28 Years Later is the third installment in the 28 Blank Later franchise, and many of us are itching to learn more about this one. For instance, did you know that you can get yourself a 28 Years Later IPA if you hate yourself enough to drink one of these? Now let's dive into 5 things you probably didn't know about this upcoming trilogy of continuations. Hey everybody, I'm KillJoy Jake, and instead of having friends, I have horror movies. Cracking into today's list, thing number 1 here is Boots, that poem that was read over the trailer and most of this film's subsequent marketing. Boots was written by Rudyard Kipling in 1903, specifically about British soldiers losing it during the Second Boer War. But here, the recitation done by Taylor Holmes in 1915 is used in relation to this new story. 28 Years Later follows characters who used to be normal civilians in England until their country fell due to the rage virus all the way back in 2002. In this new world, everyone is transformed into soldiers simply to survive, whether they like it or not. That seems to also apply to the infected, who are banding together, even following one massive alpha to lead them. In context, it gives a haunting new meaning to the repeated phrase, "There's no discharge in the war." Director Danny Boyle has talked a lot about how thoughtful and sentimental this movie is, and how the studio was worried that that might push away horror fans. Chatting with Collider, Boyle says it's quite moving and they don't want horror fans to hear that, because they think horror fans will be put off if it gets not brutal or sentimental or something like that. There is a risk taken in the second act. Based on some other things that Danny Boyle says during this Collider interview, it seems like that risk centers around Ralph Fiennes' character, who is some sort of medic. We'll talk more about him later though. The commentary in this film, which seems to be the reason why this creepy iteration of this poem was included in all the marketing for this film, seems to be inspired by real-life events. In a different interview with IGN, Boyle discusses this, saying, "Alex wrote one script at one point, but they were kind of what you'd expect from a sequel, like the virus is weaponized by a military or a government or a shady organization, that kind of thing. And neither of us were very taken by it. But then we began discussing this idea of doing a much bigger project, which was a series of films that sort of did the opposite of spreading it to Europe and the world. We turned back and looked at ourselves and we thought it was very much like an England-type film. And certainly in terms of Britain, not uniquely, but certainly in terms of Brexit, there's a couple of things that have happened to us in the intervening period since the first film that you thought, well, this is the opportunity to look at that." Just like the original movie, Years seems to have some commentary on the state of the world. Undead horror movies seem to be a great catalyst for this, even going back to the original toxic zombie movie, Night of the Living Dead. Days and seemingly Years will be no different. There's another great quote from Danny on this, saying, "That's what you use these films for. They're not lectures or anything like that, but they do reflect, or there is a reflection in them, or where you are and what's happened to you really as an individual and as people." Commentary also helps you relate to the characters on screen, potentially going through something similar to what we're all going through now. I'm excited to see that once again utilized in this new entry. That brings us to the second thing you might not have known. Years is retconning 28 Weeks Later. Sort of. Ever since the success of the original sequel in 2007, original writer-director combo Alex Garland and Danny Boyle have wanted to make their own sequel. During that time, they were busy making a film titled Sunshine that also stars Cillian Murphy and many other alumni from this franchise. I've never seen it myself, but it sounds like an insane sci-fi romp all about the sun exploding. Sign me up for that, baby. The third film, originally titled 28 Months Later, went through production hell throughout the 2010s and was thrown out for the story we're getting now. This was hilariously the inspiration for the title change too, as it literally took years to make this one. So, to course correct, 28 Years Later will assume that Paris staved off the infection that we saw at the end of the previous film. Once again, the infection is going to be isolated just to England. That quote from earlier from Danny Boyle sort of touches on the reasoning behind that. It would be the expected thing to do to have a worldwide apocalypse, but here we can focus just on how Britain is breaking down over the years because of it. From a political standpoint, that just feels a little more realistic, like there's some sort of internal problem with a country that's falling apart. That's a little easier than saying the entire world is now doomed based off of this infection. I feel like that's taking the commentary to a completely different place. The The one downside to this, in my opinion, is it just feels like 28 years later is completely throwing everything that Weeks did out the window, meaning it's great characters too. For instance, Imogen Poots expressed interest in returning to this new entry because her character sort of survived in the last one, big question mark there. But ultimately, it may just be better to follow new characters in this one. With the way Alex Garland and Danny Boyle talk about this one, it seems less of a sequel and just a new story happening in this same universe. Before we get into our next thing here, I real quickly want to ask you guys to subscribe to my gaming channel, GullGotha. We are playing a ton of spooky horror games over there like Dead by Daylight, Repo, and Alien Isolation. Check out some of those streams if you'd like, and don't forget to subscribe. The link to that page is in the description of this video. Please check it out. Thank you all again for your support. Now back to the video. Thing number 3, Jim is returning to this franchise, but not until the end of the second film here. Initially, it was announced that Cillian Murphy had signed on to reprise his role in the film. Then there were reports that came out saying he was just serving as an executive producer. Some even thought that this zombie from the initial trailer was an emaciated and infected Jim. Turns out it's just an art director that Danny Boyle was friends with and wanted him to be a zombie in this movie, which is a very silly story. There have even been photos of Cillian Murphy that leaked online of him shooting something for this film. So what's the deal here? Well, director Danny Boyle has finally came out and cleared the air, saying that Jim will return, but at the end of the Bone Temple movie. That's the second movie of the 3 films, this one being directed by Nia DaCosta. Her claim to fame in the horror game is, of course, the Candyman requel from 2021.
Tell everyone.
I'm excited to see the bike courier who miraculously survived the initial infection here in England. He's also played by the always fantastic and kind of creepy looking Cillian Murphy. I know that one zombie from the trailer's not him, but I almost kind of want to see him infected. He would play a great zombie. Talking about some of the new characters introduced in the first years, Ralph Fiennes tells IndieWire it centers on a young boy who wants to find a doctor to help his dying mother. He leads his mother through this beautiful northern English terrain, but of course, around them hiding in forests and hills and woods are the infected. But he finds a doctor who is a man we might think is going to be weird and odd, but actually is a force for good. Getting a deeper insight on these characters definitely helps with some of the comparisons to the movie Kes that Alex Garland, the writer of this movie, has said is a big inspiration for 28 years. To spoil that very old British film, it ends with the death of our main character's beloved bird, who he had taken care of. That makes me think we're in for a tragedy this time around to kind of counter the happy ending of the original. Jodie Comer plays that ill mother, and it doesn't seem like she's gonna be long for this world. No confirmation if she's returning for the Bone Temple movie or not either. Thing number 4, this movie was primarily shot on iPhone. Now you might already know that, but do you know the very interesting reason as to why? 28 Days Later achieved its unique look by being shot on digital camcorders. The goal behind this was to simulate what actual apocalypse footage would have looked like at the time. Think about this as a hypothetical. If you were walking around England in 2002 after the infected stormed the streets, during the aftermath you might find some sort of camcorder lying around with some creepy cryptic footage on it. Applying that same line of thinking to the modern day, you would probably find a blood-soaked iPhone instead. Hence, the way this one was shot. Talking about the unique setup, one of the iPhone rig operators said, "There is an incredible shot in the second half of the film where we use a 20 camera rig, and you'll know it when you see it. It's quite graphic, but it's a wonderful shot that uses that technique, and in a startling way, that kind of kicks you into a new world rather than thinking you've seen it before." Danny Boyle calls it a poor man's bullet time and says that this was utilized to make this very visceral scene much more graphic and violent. So during that point way earlier on in this video, if you were worried that this movie might not be as brutal as you would like it to be, have no fear, my friends. Horror can be, and often is, both emotional and terrifying at the same time. And finally, thing number 5, there is only one way this trilogy will be completed. 28 years later and its sequel, The Bone Temple, were shot back to back, and just a little over 6 months after the release of this first installment in a couple of weeks here, we should be getting the next one on January 16th. Danny Boyle told us at CinemaCon that the problem here is Sony will not greenlight it unless these first 2 movies are financially successful. No worries though, as Danny and Alex have some tricks up their sleeves to make sure that this third movie gets made. Like we were saying earlier, Cillian Murphy's Jim character is probably going to return at the end of the Bone Temple movie, likely pulling off a Luke Skywalker cliffhanger. Danny Boyle pretty much confirms that, saying that he shows up at the end of the second one with a much larger role in this third film. I'm speculating that we get some sort of bombshell cliffhanger cliffhanger at the end of the Bone Temple movie, meaning we have to see that third one and Sony is gonna have to greenlight it, otherwise we riot. Besides that though, the box office projections for this one based on just the pre-sale tickets alone are through the roof. 28 Years Later is expected to make over $34 million during its opening weekend alone, and just from pre-sale tickets, it has outperformed Sinners and Final Destination Bloodlines already, which were two of the highest grossing horror films of the year so far. I'm betting it blows those projections out of the water. Trust me, I don't think anyone needs to worry about that third film getting made. It definitely does have me wondering who will direct that third installment, however, especially considering that Danny Boyle is passing off the second entry to Nia DaCosta. Could Danny Boyle come back to direct this third installment? Well, that seems to be the case, although nothing is confirmed as of right now. Danny seems to be the one really talking about this third entry, especially at that CinemaCon panel, so I imagine if Sony does eventually greenlight it, which they will, he will likely be the one to direct the third installment, essentially bookending this trilogy. Fellas, I am just loving everything I'm hearing about 28 Years Later, and I cannot wait to see it on June 20th, less than 2 weeks away. Let me know your thoughts on this movie down in the comments below. Hey everybody, before we wrap up this big ol' nasty update video, please make sure to subscribe to this page for more horror updates in the future. Also, check out our merch store if you want to show off your lack of friends and your love of horror movies. The link for the store will be in the description of this video. Thank you all for watching, please subscribe, and as always, don't forget to kill it out there, y'all.